Blake Lively's world came crashing down last night when she was arrested at her Los Angeles home around 11 p.m., a stunning development that sent shockwaves through Hollywood and beyond. Whispers are now swirling that this isn't just a simple arrest, it might be part of something much bigger. Some are even speculating that Blake tried to bribe a judge to sweep the whole mess under the rug. While mainstream media has been suspiciously quiet, perhaps out of fear of backlash or legal blowback, we've uncovered explosive details from behind the scenes at the center of this chaos. It's the high-profile legal war between Blake Lively and director Justin Baldoni. Until now, the case had been crawling through the intense discovery phase, the part where both parties are required to turn over documents, testimonies, and everything else that could make or break the case. For Blake and her legal team, this wasn't just about preparing for court. It was a scramble to keep their most damaging secrets under lock and key. But according to sources close to the proceedings, things didn't go exactly by the book. Rumors began to swirl that Blake's team might have been playing dirty strategically, withholding certain key documents that could have drastically shifted the momentum in Baldoni's favor. Was a legal chess match, and it seemed Blake was making moves others didn't even see coming. But the real shock came when Judge Louis J. Lyman suddenly dismissed two major claims from Baldoni's case, claims that legal experts say could have changed everything. The strangest part? He gave no real explanation for why. He just brushed them off as irrelevant and moved on, raising eyebrows in legal circles and on social media alike. Almost instantly, whispers of corruption began to fill the air. Dismissing two potentially game-changing claims without clear justification didn't sit right with anyone. Was this just an error in judgment, or was there something more sinister at play? The dismissals felt too convenient, too calculated. Some began to wonder, was Judge Lyman compromised? Was Blake pulling strings from behind the curtain? Then came the bombshell. Sources connected to Baldoni's team claimed there might be a personal link between Blake Lively and Judge Lyman, something deeper than a courtroom relationship. Allegedly, there were private lunches, behind closed-door meetings, and subtle influence that hinted at more than professional courtesy. Was Blake using her charm, celebrity, and access to get favorable treatment from the bench? It sounded like the plot of a scandalous legal drama, but now it was bleeding into real life. What started as a civil case quickly devolved into a full-blown scandal. Social media exploded. Headlines speculated. Blake, once the poster child for grace and glamour, found herself facing accusations of manipulation, judicial misconduct, and bribery. Suddenly, the courtroom was no longer a venue for justice. It was a stage for the darkest kind of intrigue. And then, Baldoni's legal team upped the stakes even further. In an unprecedented move, they filed a formal legal accusation against Judge Lyman, alleging outright bribery in connection with the dismissed claims. It was no longer just hearsay or online gossip. This was a documented accusation that could unravel not just the case, but careers. Legal insiders called it unthinkable, a move that could lead to federal investigations, disbarment, or worse. With this accusation now in the public domain, the case has gone from scandalous to seismic. The courtroom decisions that once seemed questionable now looked like potential evidence of deep-rooted corruption. And Blake Lively, whether innocent or not, is now entangled in a narrative involving judicial misconduct, celebrity influence, and serious criminal allegations. As the dust settles and investigations begin, one thing is certain: this is no longer just about a lawsuit. It's about power, influence, and whether the justice system can stand up to both. For Blake, her public image may never recover. For Baldoni, this could be a vindication. And for Judge Lyman, his legacy hangs in the balance. Stay tuned, because this saga is far from over. If there was ever a moment when this legal firestorm turned into a full-blown game-changer, it was now. The shocking bribery allegations against Judge Louis J. Lyman didn't just threaten to upend Blake Lively's case, they threatened the credibility of the entire judicial system. If even a sliver of these claims proved true, the implications would go far beyond Hollywood drama. This was no longer just about a defamation suit. It had evolved into a scandal that could shake the foundations of legal integrity itself. The stakes had never been higher. A judge allegedly accepting bribes to sway the outcome of a celebrity case. That wasn't just news, it was a bombshell. Legal insiders, media outlets, and the public were all reeling. In response, a formal legal investigation was immediately launched to determine whether Judge Lyman had indeed manipulated his rulings in exchange for favors or financial incentives. Now, it wasn't just the attorneys and celebrities holding their breath. Public trust was on the line. The investigation quickly became the focal point, overtaking the original defamation claims. Suddenly, everyone was less interested in who said what and more concerned with whether the entire trial had been tainted from the start. As the inquiry picked up steam, troubling signs began to surface. Investigators started probing the alleged personal link between Blake Lively and Judge Lyman, and what they found raised even more questions. Patterns of judicial behavior that once seemed odd now looked suspicious. Inconsistencies in rulings, unexplained decisions, and selective dismissals all began to paint a disturbing picture. Was this all an elaborate smear campaign, or had Blake truly influenced the outcome of her own trial? The early stages of the investigation didn't offer much clarity, but they did ignite a public firestorm. Social media went into overdrive. The press dissected every development, and legal experts began calling for transparency and accountability. The public was split. Some believed Blake was the target of a carefully orchestrated attack, while others were convinced the justice system had been manipulated from the inside. What was once a courtroom drama about defamation had now become something much darker, a case study in potential corruption, celebrity privilege, and legal misconduct. The conversation had shifted entirely. No longer were people debating whether Blake Lively was guilty or innocent in the traditional sense. They were questioning whether justice could even be trusted to prevail. Then, just when it seemed the situation couldn't spiral any further, it did. Authorities executed a surprise raid on one of Blake Lively's upscale restaurants. What seemed like a bizarre turn in the story quickly revealed itself to be a calculated move. This wasn't about food permits or business taxes. This was about financial records and possible links to the very bribery scandal engulfing her trial. The raid wasn't subtle. Law enforcement officers descended on the property with a clear mission: to uncover any evidence that could tie Blake's financial dealings to improper influence over Judge Lyman. The timing couldn't have been worse. Already under intense scrutiny, Blake's public image took yet another devastating blow as footage of the raid spread like wildfire online. And this wasn't just a legal escalation, it was deeply personal. Witnesses reported seeing Blake leaving the premises in tears, visibly shaken by the public spectacle. The emotional toll was undeniable. She was no longer just a defendant in a courtroom drama. She was a woman at the center of a national scandal, grappling with legal chaos, reputational ruin, and a media frenzy unlike anything she had faced before. For Blake, the crisis had gone beyond headlines and legal briefs. It was now a personal nightmare unfolding in front of millions. From bribery accusations to the possibility of judicial compromise, and now the public raid of her business. The pressure was relentless. Whether she was the mastermind behind a carefully orchestrated manipulation of the system or the victim of an elaborate takedown, one thing was certain: this story had taken on a life of its own, with no sign of slowing down. The deeper investigators dug, the more tangled the web became. And for Blake Lively, the road ahead looked like anything but a red carpet. But Blake Lively, once Hollywood's golden girl, now stood at the center of a storm that threatened to shatter not just her career, but her entire life. The glittering image she had spent years building was unraveling before the public's eyes, and the fallout from the scandal was spreading fast. Her upscale restaurant, once a crown jewel of her post-acting ventures, was feeling the heat as well, though the establishment remained open. The uncertainty surrounding the ongoing criminal investigation cast a long, ominous shadow over its future. Patrons were uneasy, the media was relentless, and the public perception, once one of admiration, was turning cold. The raid on her restaurant, tied to the explosive bribery allegations connected to Judge Louis J. Lyman, wasn't just a headline grabber, was a turning point. Investigators suspected financial corruption and possible links between the business and the judge's suspicious dismissal of critical claims in Justin Baldoni's lawsuit. Suddenly, the restaurant wasn't just a celebrity-owned hotspot. It was a potential crime scene. And while it technically stayed in operation, its reputation had taken a blow that no amount of rebranding could immediately fix. The damage was done. The glitz had turned to grit, and Blake's name was no longer just associated with fashion, and Filmit was now linked to legal controversy and alleged corruption. Her success story outside of acting, once admired, was now marred by scandal. The emotional toll was unmistakable. Eyewitnesses described her leaving the raided restaurant in tears, visibly shaken. The pressure of her crumbling world finally showing through her typically composed exterior. As the bribery investigation deepened, the stakes became painfully clear. Both Blake's personal life and professional legacy were being dismantled. Piece by painful piece, public opinion was fractured. Some saw her as a scapegoat in a vicious smear campaign, while others were convinced she was guilty of manipulating the legal system for personal gain. Regardless of which side people were on, one thing was undeniable: her life would never be the same. And then came the hammer blow. In a dramatic and unexpected twist, Blake Lively was arrested. Late in the evening, authorities moved in and took her into custody on charges related to bribery and obstruction of justice. What had already been a high-stakes legal drama now escalated into something far more serious. Her arrest sent shockwaves through the media, the legal world, and her massive fan base. No one had seen it coming, and when the news broke, it instantly dominated headlines across the globe. This was no longer about a defamation lawsuit. It had become a full-fledged criminal case. The arrest signaled a clear shift. Authorities were no longer just investigating, they were acting, and their message was unmistakable. No one, no matter how famous, would be spared if evidence pointed to wrongdoing. The charges Blake now faced weren't just symbolic or strategic, they were severe. Central to the case were allegations that she had played a direct role in influencing Judge Lyman's controversial decision to dismiss two pivotal claims in the Baldoni suit. Authorities believe this influence might have involved bribes, backdoor deals, and manipulation actions that would constitute serious federal crimes. Blake's arrest was made under Section 134 of the U.S. Criminal Code, which deals specifically with bribery and corruption of public officials. Under this statute, offering, giving, or soliciting something of value to influence an official's decisions is a grave offense. It exists to protect the sanctity of legal rulings and the impartiality of public servants. The fact that Blake was charged under this section made it clear prosecutors weren't treating this like a celebrity scandal. They were treating it like a federal crime. The arrest added yet another layer to the spiraling saga. Suddenly, this wasn't just about reputation. It was about potential prison time. Legal experts pointed out that convictions under this section of the law can lead to long sentences, hefty fines, and irreversible damage to a person's future. And for someone like Blake Lively, whose career had been built on grace, glamour, and carefully curated public appearances, the contrast couldn't have been more jarring. The media frenzy exploded. Every outlet had the story on loop. Talk shows dissected every detail. Social media speculated wildly. and the courtroom sketches of Blake in custody became instant viral images. Legal analysts debated the strength of the case, while fans were left in disbelief. Watching their once iconic star face allegations of corruption at the highest level. Meanwhile, Blake's legal team sprang into action, doing damage control and vowing to fight the charges. They claimed she was being targeted unfairly, that the evidence was circumstantial, and that she would be vindicated in court. But the uphill battle ahead was steep, with the public already divided and investigators continuing to unearth new evidence. The path to redemption, if one even existed, looked narrow and treacherous. Blake Lively's once flawless world was now a collapsing empire. A stunning arrest, a high-profile bribery case, a business under suspicion, and a public that no longer knew what to believe. This was no longer just a Hollywood scandal. It had become a cautionary tale of fame, power, and the dangerous collision between celebrity and the justice system. Blake Lively, once the darling of Hollywood, now found herself in uncharted territory, fighting to salvage her reputation, career, and future. Her recent arrest on charges of bribery and obstruction of justice sent shockwaves through the entertainment world. But while the arrest was undeniably a major setback, it wasn't the end of the road, at least not yet. Shortly after being taken into custody, Blake was granted bail, sparing her time behind bars as her legal saga continued to unfold. Still, the damage had been done. The accusations weren't going anywhere, and her legal team was suddenly thrust into full-blown crisis mode. Blake's attorneys quickly went on the offensive, working tirelessly to contain the fallout. Their strategy shifted instantly toward fighting the serious charges head-on, arguing that the arrest was less about justice and more about a targeted campaign to destroy Blake's public image. But the courtroom wasn't their only battleground. This was also a war of public perception. Every move her team made was under the microscope. The media was watching. The fans were watching. And most importantly, the court of public opinion had already begun to weigh in. Though the charges were severe, they didn't guarantee conviction. There was still a long legal road ahead, and Blake's legal team was bracing for a grueling battle. The stakes, however, couldn't be higher. Her once untouchable reputation now teetered on the edge, and whether she could restore it or not remained to be seen. While she avoided jail time for the moment, the fallout from the arrest began to seep into every corner of her life. The glitz and glamour that once defined Blake's public image had been replaced by uncertainty and scandal. The trial took on new complexity with each passing day, and the spotlight on Blake only intensified. What had started as a single legal dispute was now a tangled web of allegations, investigations, and collapsing public trust. The shift in public sentiment was fast and unforgiving. For years, Blake had been admired not just for her acting talent, but for her style, charm, and graceful public persona. She was relatable, elegant, and adored. But now, all of that was in jeopardy. As the bribery and obstruction allegations made headlines, fans were left stunned. Many felt disillusioned. How could someone they idolized be caught up in something so serious? Others clung to hope, believing Blake was being targeted unfairly. The result was a deeply divided public, with some rallying behind her and others turning away in disappointment. The media predictably pounced on the story. Tabloids splashed her mugshot across front pages while news anchors debated the strength of the case against her. Social media became a battleground of opinions. Some posts defended her fiercely, while others tore her down. Blake, once a media darling, had become the centerpiece of a scandal that refused to fade. But the consequences weren't just reputational, they were financial. Almost overnight, Blake's brand began to collapse. Companies that had once vied for her endorsement were now quietly pulling out of deals, scrambling to distance themselves from the controversy. Campaigns she had long been the face of were either suspended or terminated entirely. The partnerships that had made her one of the most bankable celebrities in Hollywood were drying up. And the ripple effect was brutal. The financial losses extended beyond sponsorships. Film roles, projects, and business ventures that had been lined up were suddenly put on hold or canceled altogether. Her restaurant, already damaged by the investigation and raid, struggled to attract patrons. What? Once been a shining symbol of her entrepreneurial success, now stood as a reminder of scandal. Blake's financial foundation, once solid and thriving, was now riddled with uncertainty. In Hollywood, reputation is currency, and Blake's was in free fall. The high-end endorsements, luxury campaigns, and fashion collaborations she had effortlessly commanded were now out of reach. Instead of being seen as a polished, dependable brand ambassador, she was increasingly viewed as a liability. Even if she cleared her name in court, rebuilding the empire she had worked so hard to create would take years. If it could be salvaged at all? Amid the storm, however, a few loyal voices emerged. Some celebrities, both within and beyond Hollywood, spoke out in her defense, suggesting she was the victim of an overblown scandal and a biased investigation. Others sympathized with the intense pressure she faced, arguing that the justice system and media had turned her into a scapegoat. Still, many more remained silent, unwilling to risk their own public standing. By being associated with someone so